Does God exist? This is a second argument, if you like, that proves that God exists using logic and using reasoning without having to resort to biblical scriptures. The second argument is called the design argument, or universities professors like to call it teleological argument. It's a mouthful, but I'd rather call it design argument. This argument makes the point that the laws of nature and the whole of the universe demonstrate immense specific complexity, marking, or the mark of design, if you like. With this specific complexity, therefore, the universe must have some form of an intelligent designer behind this design, if you like. I mean, if you look at an iPhone, let's call it, you know that somebody has designed this complex piece of device. There is no argument that somebody designed the iPhone and somebody manufactured the iPhone. And you replace this iPhone with the world, for instance. The world is a lot more complex than the iPhone. The universe is even more complex than the iPhone. And if you have no problems believing that there is a designer behind the iPhone and there is a manufacturer behind the iPhone, using the same logic, there must be a very intelligent designer that designs the earth. Let's use another example. You're walking in a park and you come across this beautiful ball that it's carved out of wood, and it's carved in a way that it looks like the globe. It has its countries carved perfectly into this beautiful piece of wood that is no bigger than a soccer ball. The first thing you look at this piece of rounded earth that's carved out of the wood, you would say, well, somebody must have carved this, somebody must have designed it, and somebody must have carved it. You have no problems dealing with that thought, and that somebody must have left it there. It could not possibly just simply appear in front of you. I mean, that's a simple logic. And imagine yourself now looking at this ball, and this ball is growing into a huge ball that is the size of perhaps your suburb. It's so huge, you can see it covering the entire suburb. You would then think that, wow, a big machine must have made this carved piece of wood that looks like a globe. Then go a bit further, that you're out in the sky, out in the moon, looking at this great big ball that's called Earth, surrounded by this layer called the atmosphere to protect its inhabitants. You must also think that there must be a designer behind this wonderful ball called Earth. That's got to be an intelligent designer designing this complex piece of thing called the Earth. Let's look at another example. Let's look at the example of the simple living cell. Does this cell have some form of a pattern or a specific complexity behind it? Let's try and take a cell and magnify. And can you imagine 1 billion or 2 billion or 3 billion times? On the surface of this cell, you see many, many millions of openings, like pores in a ship, little holes, like little potholes in a ship, if you like. These little pores, they regulate the flow of materials in and out of the cell. The cell it itself exhibits complex nano engineering on a scale and sophistication that scientists will not even begin to imagine. Francis Crick, one of the co-founders of the DNA project or DNA structure, or discoverers of the DNA structure, he describes this simple cell as a minute factory bustling with rapid organized chemical activities. This was in the early 1980s. Scientists now think that a simple cell, it's like an automated city. Inside the cell, they find that there are a host of raw materials maneuvering back and forth like robot-like machines, all working in unison. There seems to be a structure and an order being exhibited within this simple cell. A level of control. Their movements seem like they're being choreographed. They're being controlled by some form of an intelligence behind this materials that are inside this simple cell. This form of control, this intelligence inside this simple cell can be attributed by the scientists, attributed to coils of DNA within those cells. And DNA is, if you like, the language or the instructions behind this cell that provides them with the order or with the rules or with the power to be able to robot-like communicate with each other and move in unison. A typical, the DNA in itself stores this information to construct those proteins. The proteins themselves are remarkable complex molecule systems in itself, just like huge computer systems. Biologists today cannot even describe the activities inside a simple cell without comparing it to machines and other feasts of modern engineering. They cannot explain it. Nothing can compare with the complexity and the intelligence behind a simple living cell. Scientists cannot, and they marvel at this intelligence behind it. They can only come out with a conclusion that there must be some form of intelligence behind this very, very simple living cell. Well, let us now be a little bit more adventurous. So let's look at life in itself. Life, or even the simplest of bacterial cells, requires a vast amount of information to function. Cellular information is stored in DNA. The DNA in one cell in the human body, like yours and mine, holds, according to the scientists, an equivalent of roughly 8,000 books of information. Well, I think the number of thousands of books of information is irrelevant. Some say 10,000, some say 9,000. We just say the human body holds a whole lot of information inside, held within the DNA, if you like. A typical human body has about 10 or 100 trillion cells. Each of it has some DNA strand that could be uncoiled to thousands and millions and millions and millions of miles, if you like. So in other words, what we're saying, the human body is made out of intricate formation and intricate information stored in a DNA. Let's assume that there are no intelligence designer behind it. How would the needed information from the DNA for life be assembled? If there are no instructions to process or create proteins, no instructions to do all these activities that's needed to sustain and create life, there is no intelligence behind it. How can life in itself sustain itself? How can you and I survive without such information? Well, the typical non-biblical or non-Christian answer, or Darwinist answer, is chance. Well, give us enough time, give us enough matter, and give us enough chance, anything can happen. That, to me, is quite a simplistic argument, and I'm very surprised so-called learned professors of very renowned universities subscribe to that belief. The question I would ask it as a simple person is, well, how much time do you need? How much matter and how much chance actually is available? Well, I mean, mathematicians tried very hard to calculate it, but they can come up with numbers that are unbelievable. And that doesn't gives me a good sense of confidence that the university professors or Darwinians know what they're talking about. Just to summarize some of the explanation they use, without intelligent design, without intelligence behind some form of activity, you cannot simply create something that's meaningful. And I quote an example that's been used by many people. They say, well, let's assuming it's a storybook. Well, Shakespeare, for instance, had written many storybooks, and one book called Hamlet, if you like. It's written by a man with intelligence. Now, if we say, given time and matter and chance, the book might be written by something without intelligence, doesn't make sense to me. For instance, you can get a group of 100 monkeys and give each monkey a word processor or a computer and get them to just type on the keyboard randomly. What are the chances that this 1,000 or 100 monkeys can create a book, a storybook, or a book called The Hamlet? Most intelligent people would say zero, or if not none. Monkeys cannot type an information out and communicate their thought process through to us using the typewriter. You and I perhaps can, but the chances of 1,000 monkeys typing to say, hey, how are you today? I am going to school and I'm going to learn all about English today will probably never happen. That sentence will never happen by 1,000,000 or 1,000 monkeys with 1,000,000 typewriters or 1,000,000 computers. That's what we mean by chance without intelligent design behind it. A single cell in our body requires hundreds of thousands of bits of information precisely sequenced in its DNA so that we can survive and continue to survive, so that we can operate in a way that we operate. There is definitely it's got to be an intelligent behind that DNA, an intelligent designer behind that DNA. Without that, it would be an impossible task of explaining how the information in even a simple living organism can arise from an unguided, blind process called chance and time. Life simply requires too much information for it to occur randomly. So, when we look at the incredible complexity and design all around us, we are faced with a choice. Either the entire universe, down to a single living cell was designed intelligently for a purpose, or it developed through a combination of chance and laws of nature. I know which one I will be betting against. The cosmos is indeed, and it has to be a product of intelligent design. It cannot be a product of cosmic chance, a cosmic fluke. It's got to be God behind the universe.